Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And it is perhaps a little provocative to suggest that the huntswoman who is setting about a so-called saboteur with her riding crop seems to me to have right on her side, but it's also my currently sincerely held belief, so we'll examine that story later in the programme. Similarly, the notion that women who've been to single-sex schools are somehow better equipped to fight or to deal with sexual harassment. You heard Nick discussing this a few moments ago. I'm fascinated by all aspects of single-sex education for a variety of reasons, both personal and politic, and we will stuck right into that story, I think, later in the programme, unless, of course, you'd rather talk about the fact that the Boaty McBoatface firm has had to issue an emergency call for 300 European workers due to a chronic engineering skills shortage in Britain. But I'm going to try to get through today without going too bonkers about Brexit, which means we'll begin, as we so often do, with the Daily Mail. One of the reasons fake news hasn't quite catalysed. What's the word I'm looking for? One of the reasons fake news hasn't had quite the impact in this country that it has had in America is because we've had it for a lot longer. We've had it for ages. The Daily Mail was adjudged a couple of years ago by Wikipedia to be an utterly unreliable news source. Indeed, the phrase I always remember them employing to describe the editorial policies of the Daily Mail was flat-out fabrication. And until Donald Trump's campaign began, America didn't really, and until the rise of your kind of Breitbart and InfoWars-inspired pseudo-journalism, America didn't really have people telling barefaced lies in the public arena, people poisoning the well of democratic discourse by telling absolutely barefaced lies, things that they knew to be untrue, or at least if they made a mistake, going utterly uncorrected. Whereas we've had it for the longest time. We've had it for 20 or 30 years. And I think that explains this curious story regarding the stationery company Paperchase. It's a jolly shop for sort of young women, sort of teenage girls, isn't it? It's where you go to buy your multicoloured writing paper and your silver pens and your cards and your tinsel and your glitter and your wrapping paper. It's a nice shop to browse in, actually, if you're a 14-year-old girl. But the Daily Mail are furious with them today, absolutely furious. We find ourselves contemplating this fantastic vista wherein a newspaper that recently described elected MPs in our sovereign parliament as collaborators, precisely the word used by Joe Cox's assassin Thomas Mayer, Joe Cox's white supremacist terrorist killer. He called her one of the collaborators. Paul Dacre, the editor of the Daily Mail, has piled in without so much as a by your leave and stuck pictures of Conservative MPs in his newspaper last week with that word above their heads, collaborators. He also, of course, described Ed Miliband's late father as a sort of treacherous character who hated Britain. He has described recently High Court judges as enemies of the people. He has described politicians seeking to exercise their democratic mandate in Parliament as saboteurs. He routinely launches his curiously castrated attack dogs on the likes of such enemies of the state as Lily Allen and Gary Lineker, and encourages his terrified and furious readership to turn their attentions absolutely anywhere except towards the fact that the Daily Mail, last time I registered its owning company, was registered in Bermuda, and the fellow who owns it is registered as not living here on the grounds of, well, you work it out for yourself, but never ever talk about stuff like that, or the fact that the editor has a shooting estate. I kid you not, this great champion of anti-elites has a shooting estate in Scotland. There will, in decades to come, be absolute incomprehension on the part of historians about how one person has been allowed to exercise such a malign and dishonest influence over British politics, over British democracy. And of course, how long did I last without mentioning Brexit? 4 minutes. And of course, the responsibility for Brexit lies at his feet so completely that it's almost easy to write anybody else out of the process. I got a text from Cornwall yesterday asking me why I'm so relaxed about borders in the context of a conversation about Ireland, from Cornwall, and then went on to list all the Daily Mail inspired terrors of criminals coming in and refugees hiding in vans and all of these stories that happen on a regular basis, but get coverage that is defined and determined entirely by the foreignness of the people being featured. Like that famous lorry driver story from a couple of years ago when they sent photographers out to take pictures of lorry drivers on telephones and only printed pictures of Polish and foreign and Eastern European ones. Quite an incredible outbreak of mainstream, utterly normalised, unchallenged xenophobia. And somehow these sort of weapons-grade bullies, this man who has turned his own psychodrama into an attack upon the national interest, has been completely upset by a wrapping paper company. It's the most bizarre set of circumstances I can remember contemplating for a while. A man who thinks nothing of launching attacks upon a woman like Lily Allen suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after a monstrous miscarriage a couple of years ago. He'll think nothing at all about writing about her in the most vile and abusive of terms. A relatively robust young woman, but one who hardly constitutes a just target for the full might of the Daily Mail and General Trust. But he'll think nothing about launching an attack on her. He routinely encourages people to turn their fury upon such terrible, terrible examples of British badness as judges and MPs and journalists, the BBC, wherever it may be. And somehow a wrapping paper company has put the frighteners on him. It doesn't really make sense, does it? If you're not across this story, I sort of envy you. I wasn't across it until this morning. It's one of those curious examples that we've talked about a lot together lately, where I wasn't aware of the outrage until all the people started telling me how outraged they were by the outrage. So Paperchase came under fire from its shoppers, encouraged by a campaign group called Stop Funding Hate, because the Paperchase customers and people responding to this campaign felt that the company shouldn't be associating itself with a I say news outlet very loosely, with a newspaper that essentially indulges in the worst kind of scapegoating and othering. And that's fair enough, isn't it? I mean, they're perfectly entitled, the customers or campaigners are perfectly entitled to say to Paperchase, are you sure you want to be associated with a newspaper that, I don't know, describes MPs in the same language that Joe Cox's killer used? Are you sure you want to be associated with a newspaper that maligns the independence of the judiciary, one of the most fundamental cornerstones of our democracy? And here is a man who hates it. He calls them enemies of the people when judges do their job. Are you sure that you want your tinsel and your glittery bows to be advertised or promoted in a newspaper that will take the dead father of a perfectly decent man like Ed Miliband and completely traduce his posthumous reputation? Are you sure you want to be associated with a newspaper that will take a woman with post-traumatic stress disorder and invite readers to bombard her with abuse and vitriol? Are you sure that you want to be associated with a newspaper that doesn't mention the tax arrangements of its own owner while going after Gary Lineker for buying and selling a house in a Caribbean island a few years ago? Are you sure you want to be associated with a newspaper that does all of these things? And Paperchase are perfectly entitled to turn around and say, crikey, I didn't know any of that, but on reflection, yes, I am perfectly happy to remain associated with the Daily Mail because it sells millions of copies. Most of its readers are perfectly decent people, and we might flog a bit of wrapping paper off the back of the promotion. But surely they're also entitled to turn around and say, crikey, we didn't know. We had no idea the Daily Mail did all of those things. No one's ever told me. I don't listen to James O'Brien on LBC, and there's no one else in the British media who's sticking their head over this particular parapet. So now I've been made aware of just how vile their coverage is, just how dishonest they are, just how vicious and divisive, and I'm afraid it would appear sociopathic some of their editorial motivation is. Now that I've been made aware of this, I don't think we'll do another promotion with them after all. I love newspapers. I got a soft spot for much of the Mail. I've got mates that work there, and that's why I'm uncomfortable in a way with a call for advertisers to boycott it, because that won't really punish the people who've already got millions of pounds in the bank, like the editor and the owner. It's more likely, if it did have an economic impact upon the newspaper, to see a sort of down-table sub or a secretary or a junior reporter get the flick in order to save the money that's been lost from the promotional work. So oddly, perhaps, given that I make little secret of my detestation of everything that Paul Dacre represents and stands for, oddly, perhaps, I'm a little torn on this one. Because between you and me, I could easily have ended up working there. I'm a kid with a very small skill set, you know? All I ever wanted to be was a newspaper journalist. And there are increasingly few, or rather a decreasing number of jobs available. And I'm pretty certain that if the cards had fallen, we all have to hold our nose sometimes. Look at some of the people I have to call colleagues these days. We all have to hold our nose at work sometimes. And if I had been an arts journalist, which is oddly what I really wanted to be when I first got onto Fleet Street, or a features writer writing long double-page colour pieces about anything under the sun, I'm fairly clear. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not deluded enough to think that I would have had the economic wherewithal to stand up and say, I refuse to work here. So I could have ended up working there, which means that an advertising boycott is going to hit relatively decent people who find the Daily Mail's editorial line utterly disgusting. The number of people who work there who get in touch with me privately to say thank you is unbelievable. Bloke sidled up to me on the platform at Embankment Station the other day. It's like something out of a John le Carré novel. And I had my winter hat on as well, so he double-checked it was me. He said, you James O'Brien? And he was sort of almost glancing furtively to the left and the right. And I'm reading spy novels at the moment, so it's possible I slightly exaggerated this. And I went, yes. Hello. He goes, can I just say thank you for everything you're doing? And I said, of course you can. How charming. I said, waiting to see if the conversation is going to continue. And it's sort of, there's this odd pause. And he goes, I work for the Daily Mail. I see you worried someone might see you talking to me. And of course, almost all of the people that work on the Daily Mail find the editor disgusting, but there are sort of 3 or 4 people, Quentin Letts, Richard Littlejohn, Sarah Vine, the columnists in receipt of six-figure plus salaries, who kind of hold their nose more tightly than anybody else and go out pretending that they agree with his xenophobic, misogynistic, racist, actually. Some of the Irish people that work there tell me astonishing stories about the way he talks to them. But there you go. He makes a lot of money for the owner, and therefore he remains in his job. So 10:15 is the time. A stationery company has outraged people who stayed silent when Paul Dacre employed the language of Joe Cox's killer to describe 15 Tory MPs. But the same people that stayed silent then are absolutely furious that a greetings card company has announced its intention not to do any co-promotions with them again. If you needed a mark of how bonkers Britain is becoming, this would probably be as good as any. But I appreciate that this is a bit of a dereliction of duty on my part. I love the way the Daily Mail statement has said Paper Chase has let itself be bullied into apologising. The day that the Daily Mail is accusing a greetings card company of being bullied. The Daily Mail apparently now doesn't like bullying, which will leave about 48 pages of tomorrow's paper completely blank if they manage to bring this message home and practice what they preach. But I just don't know whether or not advertising boycotts work. There's a degree of self-interest involved as well. My wages are paid via advertising budgets, and there are there's at least one person on this radio station that the people behind Stop Funding Hate would consider to be even more despicable than Paul Dacre. I wouldn't be able to argue with them. So the idea of advertisers boycotting a company is to my mind, at this point in proceedings, not the right way to tackle these sort of issues. But I want to know what you think. I'm going to open the phone lines now, and if you hit the numbers, you will get through. Straight up, gut shot, okay? Just what do you think about it? I'm not here to poke you or to pretend outrage one way or the other in the hope of stoking your fires of fury. I'm here just to ask, what do you think? The Daily Mail is by most decent standards a pretty despicable outfit in some ways. In other ways, it's by far the best newspaper in Britain. It employs some of the nation's most highly paid hate preachers, and a lot of people have got a problem with that. They have therefore suggested to a greetings card company that you probably shouldn't get into bed with each other, and the greetings card company have agreed. End of story. What am I missing? What am I supposed to be outraged about? And what do you think about the idea of pressure being brought to bear upon a commercial enterprise to cease its cooperation with another commercial enterprise that essentially commoditizes hate, dishonesty and fury? 18 minutes after 10 is the time. So you're pretty clear on what I think about the Daily Mail. I'm not clear on what I think about this particular story, which is why I need you to tell me what you think, and I will nick the most intelligent response. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, and we're just wondering what we think about customers encouraging companies to cease commercial cooperation with news outlets they don't like. If you want to know what the sound of knickers in an almighty twist is, listen to this. However, it is deeply worrying that Paperchase should have allowed itself to be bullied into apologising on the back of a derisory 250 Facebook comments and 150 direct tweets. Oh, pity the poor soul who had to go and count them. To internet trolls orchestrated by a small group of hard-left Corbynist individuals. This is brilliant. They're complaining about Paperchase being bullied, and then straight away, it's almost as if they have an inability to control their own gobs. Hard-left Corbynist individuals seeking to suppress legitimate debate and impose their views on the media. How is Paperchase saying we're not going to give away any more free wrapping paper in the Daily Mail, suppressing legitimate debate? Answers on a postcard. Actually, it'd be quicker to ring. 0345 6060 973. Martin's in Epsom. Martin, what do you think?
Hi, James. I think the reason they're so annoyed by this is because, I mean, I've been following Don't Stop Funding Hate for quite a while, and this seems to be the biggest sort of publicity stunt by far that they've managed to achieve.
Who? Stop Funding Hate?
Yeah. They've been doing great work.
Well, you can say publicity stunt, or you could just say result that comes with a lot of publicity. Publicity stunt's a bit cynical. I think they act in good faith, don't they?
As usual, you are far better at articulating these things.
No, don't be soft. Carry on.
It's kind of the thing where if you can make God bleed, people will cease to believe in him, and the sharks will start circling. You know, they've been the Daily Mail.
I see what you mean. So any little nick is much bigger than we realise, because their whole business model relies entirely on being completely unchallenged. It's why you will never, ever see the editor being interviewed anywhere, because the whole act would fall apart like a cheap suit in response to just two very simple questions.
Precisely. They can act entirely with impunity.
And create an alternative universe for their readers, where immigration is to blame for everything, and their whole lives are somebody else's fault.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not a hard-left Corbynist. I'm about...
Oh, yes, you are, I'm afraid. In Paul Dacre's world, you don't get to suggest that you might not be. If he says you are, you are. That's what's beautiful about this statement, isn't it? A small group of hard-left Corbynist individuals, because nobody else is allowed to find the employment of the same word that Joe Cox's killer used to describe 15 MPs abhorrent. Only hard-left Corbynist individuals are, Martin.
Well, if Mr. Dacre's listening, I was furious that the Labour front bench voted to leave the customs union yesterday. But no, I think it's just a case of it finally sort of a chink in the armour, you know?
But I know this sounds a little selfish. There are a lot of very, very good people working for that newspaper who find some of the editorial lines just as despicable as you do, and I don't want any pat lines about, you know, only following orders and Nuremberg defences. People dream of being journalists, and it's one of those jobs that you would, you know, you'd murder your grandmother to get an even break, and to get on a paper like that would be the best day of many of these people's careers. And they don't do the stuff about Lily Allen. They don't do the stuff, and if they do, sometimes they have to just hold their nose and go along with it. If they were to lose their jobs or somehow feel the pinch for this, would you still be in favour of it?
I've done a degree in journalism, and my mum used to work for the BBC, and I have massive sympathy for anyone who's either trying to get into it or is already in it. But I feel like if you can't hit them where it hurts in the wallet, then how else are you ever going to make a stand against these papers? And I hate to use the American phrase of collateral damage, but it's kind of, you know...
Yeah, I think I'm too close to it for that. I think I'm too close to it to be comfortable with the collateral damage, although I gather that you smuggled in an Iron Man reference during the course of this call, which has delighted at least two of my Twitter followers, Martin. Were you aware of this?
Yes, I was.
Well done.
And had you have called me out on it, I would have totally admitted it. So,
26 minutes after 10. Leave that for the podcast. People can work it out for themselves. Press rewind. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got phone lines free. It's a bit niche, this, but I make no apology for that. It's you know, it's my world, this, and the worlds clash when you have an utterly corrupt editorial policy being pursued by the most powerful newspaper in the country, and you're an individual who loves newspapers and has them in their blood. Wayne in Basildon writes, freedom of speech, free market capitalism, private capital, democracy. All have been shown here, and these are the things that the Daily Mail readers champion. Brenda's reminds us that Lego waved goodbye some time ago to these sort of cooperations. I think that's correct. Brendan's usually pretty reliable. But just to glance at some of the other texts coming in, maybe advertising boycotts might temper some of the extremes of xenophobia and hate which seep from the Mail. I'm not holding my breath, though. It's good for advertisers to boycott the Mail, such as Lego. It chips away at their reputation. No doubt their readers will see it as a respectable way to be homophobic, racist, misogynistic, bullying. I admire you for exposing it so often, says Joe. Well, it won't last. I'll get my orders. And I understand what you mean about your friends, James. Tracy refers to journalists on the newspaper who are decent people, almost all of them. But imagine what Muslims, for example, have to put up with as a result of the Mail. They have to go to work with some of these readers that lap up this bile. It's just not right. It must be awful for them. Tracy, they're displaying empathy, which automatically disassociates her from the hardcore rump of Daily Mail readers. 28 minutes after 10. Abdul is in Luton. Abdul, what would you like to say?
Yes, just to quote your earlier presenter who said that...
Well, we don't do that. We don't do that, mate. Okay, carry on.
Fine. To quote someone... you do not have the right not to be offended. Well, equally so, the Daily Mail and any of its supporters do not have the right not to be offended by this protest.
I don't know what that means. What, you don't have the right not to be offended? What does that mean? Surely I've got the right not to be offended.
Well, I think they're trying to silence us.
But what does it mean? I don't know what it means. What do the words mean? You don't have the right not to be offended.
Well, regardless, what they're really trying to say is that only one side has the right to be offended, which is the likes of the Daily Mail and its supporters, but everyone else has to be silent in the face of the vitriol and the hate that comes out of it. And to
No, I don't think anyone's saying you have to be silent. They just don't like being hit in the wallet. Isn't it? Because you could stand up and say, the Daily Mail's awful, Paper Chase, what are you playing at? What they're cross about, I think, is that Paper Chase have gone, God, you're right, it is awful. We had no idea. We make wrapping paper. I didn't realise that the editor allowed headlines to go in using the same word that Joe Cox's murderer used to describe 15 Conservative MPs. I just didn't realise that. I'm in the business of making tinsel.
Yes, well, I mean, silent enough so that it doesn't hurt them.
Yeah.
Now, to address another point that you raised is whether or not it's okay to protest in such a way, even if it costs some people their jobs within the Daily Mail or maybe their earnings.
We won't do that, and I'm going to say hopefully. I wouldn't want anyone to lose their job in any circumstances, really.
But even in the worst case scenario, let's assume that did happen, and I'm not wishing for it to happen, especially to those who aren't responsible for this kind of vitriol and hateful reporting. But even if it did happen, it's a very small price to pay, considering the people on the other side of the equation, i.e., Jews, Muslims, or women, or other communities.
They haven't really gone after the Jews under this owner. It was under his great-grandfather, I think, that they were essentially backing Hitler and printing headlines that said "Hurrah for the black shirts" when Oswald Mosley was on the rise. But you're right, the Daily Mail did write about Jewish refugees in the 1930s coming from Germany in exactly the same way that they write about Syrian refugees today.
Yeah, the issue isn't about which specific target it is. It's the fact that they're bigoted in general. And there are people on the receiving side of that hate, people like Muslims of the community to which I belong to, and others as well, who face this kind of vitriol. And what the price we pay is huge in comparison to the unfortunate few who may suffer within the Daily Mail who don't actually, who aren't responsible for the kind of hate and vitriolic reporting from the Daily Mail.
So you see the scales, you're employing the scales of justice, and you're finding my argument a little bit weak.
It's technically, it may well technically be true, but in reality, it's not enough. It's not enough to say that we shouldn't protest and take action against them. And let's be honest, if it's legal for them to report in news in such a hateful way, it's legal for us to oppose them in a legal way. And you know what? Fair play to those who oppose them, and I hope that and also I would argue that it's not really likely for them to start sacking people or to get rid of potential staff. I think, or reduce their earnings. I think then, you know what, I'm a bit a bit naive, but I'm hopeful that maybe the lower-level journalists start to, rethink the way they
doesn't work like that. I'm afraid. No, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. He prances around the editorial floor, and the joke they make on the Daily Mail is that his shoes last forever because they never come into contact with anything harder than a carpet. He gets out. There's just like 3 yards of pavement between his chauffeur-driven limousine and when he gets into his executive lift. That's the only time his the soles of his shoes, ever come into contact with a hard surface. The rest of the time it's all gentlemen's clubs, shooting estates, gated communities, executive lifts, chauffeur-driven limousines, and carpeted offices. And it's actually true. 10:32 is the time. 2 stories that I'd like to find out a little bit more about, international but with domestic ramifications. We have lost our seat at the International Court of Justice for the first time since 1946. I think the Wikipedia page for the International Court of Justice, unless it's been updated since I got into work this morning, still lists the members of the UN Security Council as having a seat on the International Court of Justice. We've lost it. Some people suggesting it's indicative of our declining global influence, but I don't want to believe that, and I know you won't either. So I want to speak to somebody about that, and I'm drawn also still towards the continuing problems problems from Angela Merkel's point of view in Germany. The frankly remarkable sight now, such is the madness of Brexit, of British commentators and politicians welcoming political instability in Germany. Because, of course, history teaches us that political instability in Germany is always great for the United Kingdom. Imagine that. Imagine now being so desperate to find nuggets of optimism or good news that as your blind Brexit enthusiasm leads you ever closer to oblivion, you find yourself shouting, yes, but look, Angela Merkel's got problems. Hello. So we'll try and find out just what is going on over there as well. 10:38 is the time. Before that, it's a funny one, this, and it's a bit niche. I don't imagine most people care that much about the inner machinations of newspapers and their advertisers. But I am chuckling, as a lot of you are, at the snowflake. It's not a word I use very often, but I believe it means people who are perceived by their supposed enemies to have massively overreacted to something. And the Daily Mail's reaction to the greeting cards company Paperchase's decision not to do any more promotional work with them is hilariously snowflakey. Has the company considered what message they are sending to the 4 million people who read the Daily Mail on Saturday, many of whom will be their customers? Yeah, of course they have. The message they're sending is, we sell great wrapping paper, but we don't think we want to be associated with the Daily Mail now that some people have explained to us what they do. We're too busy designing wrapping paper and buying greetings cards to actually be aware of the fact that they indulge on a daily basis in the worst kind of anti-democratic propagandizing. But now that people have explained it to us, we're not going to work with them. I'm not sure that I approve of these sort of ideas, largely because I'm a professional commentator who's paid from advertising revenue. So I don't really like the idea of advertising revenues being used to punish professional commentators. But when the professional commentary is as toxic and as dishonest as the Daily Mail, you do wonder whether perhaps a case could be made. 10:40 is the time. John is in Kingston. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. Nice to talk to you. I'm from a group that I don't know whether you've heard of us. We're called Far Right Watch. We're a sort of an anti-hate
What do you think? What do you think?
I figured you had, yeah. This Paperchase story, I find it quite amusing sometimes. I can see your point about, journalists needing a job and things like that. I think the key point here, Paperchase is a commercial organisation. And
yes.
They have a media department and a public relations department. It's their job to protect their image.
Yes.
So I think they're quite within their rights to make choices like this if they choose to do so.
But obviously they're within their rights, and you dispute the analysis that they have allowed itself to be bullied into apologising by a small group of hard-left Corbynist individuals. You can almost see the underpants on his head and the pencils up his nose.
I noticed a trend of that on various social media threads. The word bullying seemed to be quite repetitive, almost like it had been... It was almost scripted. It was ridiculous. But the comparison I wanted to make was Paperchase, commercial organisation, compared to, for example, Twitter and Facebook, who are also commercial organisations.
Yes.
And anybody who breaks their rules and gets suspended, normally, they throw the snowflake toys out of the pram, exactly as you described very a while ago. And they always talk about their free speech being inhibited. I'm afraid if you break the rules, you get suspended. That's the end of the story. Because Twitter, social media companies are commercial organisations. Paper Chase is as well, and if they don't want to associate them with themselves with the Daily Mail, it's their choice. But I think there is a good comparison here with Breitbart in the USA. There's a similar organisation to stop fighting hate called Sleeping Giants. You might be aware of those as well.
Yes.
And they've had a very long-run campaign against online advertisers, against Breitbart in the USA, which has been very successful.
Breitbart, described by its founder, Steve Bannon, as a platform for the alt-right. It has sort of sections dedicated to... I think they have a black crime section last time I was compelled to have a look for reasons I can't...
I'd go further. I'd say it's a platform for white supremacists.
It may be, but not everybody who works there will be a white supremacist. Sure. We have to remember that as well.
This is true. And also going back to your point, not everybody who works for the Daily Mail is in tune with their political views. Even though they had
Milo on the payroll for a while, didn't they? The fellow who tried to excuse paedophilia the other day.
Yes, well, we won't go with Milo. He's the one that claimed that Twitter would die 6 months after he left, and a year and a half later they're still going quite strong.
They seem to be doing okay.
One thing I wanted to mention about the Daily Mail, kind of tongue-in-cheek, they're not the worst media title in the UK for this kind of thing.
Well, no, I know what you're going to say. My alma mater, under a different owner, my beloved. I know where you're going with this.
Going to the Express.
Yeah, but they don't wield anything like the power that the Mail wields. Theresa May does not lie awake at night worrying what the editor of the Daily Express is going to do tomorrow, whereas she definitely does worry. That's why he's already been round for dinner.
This is true, yeah. But I mean, Ipso are pretty toothless. You know, they do very little, and of course...
this is the press watchdog.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we started doing an analysis back in July 2015 for the breaches of Editors Code number 1, which is, false headlines, false stories. And the Express have been the number 1 paper for almost every month apart from 2. But like you say, the Mail has the clout. The Express doesn't really.
And the ear of the politicians as well. So, can you imagine more of this happening? It's an interesting call to take because, there are 4 million people who buy the paper on a Saturday, and a significant slice of them will be registering promotions like this one and possibly making their way to shops like Paper Chase as a result. Ditto Lego, but they've made an analysis and decided that there's more harm in it than good.
Sure. I don't think it's a new thing because ethical shopping has been around for a long time. There's lots of people who, for example, ethically shop and they won't buy mobile phone services from Vodafone. They won't order for books from Amazon for various reasons, mainly tax avoidance. Ethical shopping has been the thing for a long time. Probably about 15 years. I mean, there are entire websites and magazines devoted to it. And I think it is, between elections, it's almost the only power that a voter has, is power with their wallet. And it can work very well. So I think it's a good thing. I know you have your reservations. I can understand that. You need to stick up for your fellow journalists.
It's not just that, mate. I'm a flipping holier than thou, as holier than thou as anybody. But I genuinely think I'd have ended up working there if the cards had fallen differently in my career, and I'd have a massive problem with that, a cognitive dissonance and a huge hypocrisy. But I don't think I would have had the guts to take the hit in my wallet that my principles would have demanded. That's all.
I actually had a very interesting meet with at the last general election in my local area. I bumped into a Daily Mail journalist who was a friend of a candidate.
Yes.
But he was a sports journalist, and I started mentioning politics, and he rolled his eyes and kind of shrugged his shoulders as if to say, what can you do?
If I were to read out a list of some of the Daily Mail journalists that have been in touch with me privately to express their, I'm going to use the word admiration, even though it makes me sound silly, admiration and gratitude, then there'd be a lot of empty desks on the editorial floor tomorrow morning. Just before you go, you mentioned Ipso, the press regulator. Of course, Paul Dacre was on the Ipso committee, wasn't he, until relatively recently?
Yeah, and of course he was having dinner with Theresa May only recently as well. There's that link which is appalling. Anybody with such power in the media, people like Rupert Murdoch and Dacre, shouldn't be having dinner with the Prime Minister.
Well, I think Rupert Murdoch said, didn't he, to Anthony Hilton, the city editor of the Evening Standard, that one of the reasons why he doesn't like Brussels is because they're not interested in anything he's got to say, whereas when he seeks to make an appointment with a British Prime Minister, they roll out the red carpet. I paraphrase slightly. John, many thanks indeed. If you're not familiar with the work that Far Right Watch does, allow me to suggest it does exactly what it says on the tin. Unfortunately, it's meant that this radio station has come to their attention a little in recent months, but we are where we are. It's 10:46. Lots to get through today. Change of pace coming up later in the programme. I don't know if you were listening yesterday. I had so much fun talking about the etiquette and the class context of aeroplane boarding techniques. Don't laugh. If you weren't listening, you don't know what you're laughing at. Yes, I did. I was laughing at you. Yeah, well, all right. But it reminded me sometimes that we can have the most fun together sometimes when we step away from the kind of headline news and look instead for developments that are taking place around us receiving rather less notice. I think a couple of stories I want to talk about later fall into that category. But reasons I absolutely love Twitter, chapter 10,000,002. A prominent BBC political journalist tweeted last night, Germany tonight is in its biggest political crisis since the late 1940s, bigger even than the UK's current ongoing political crisis. And I read that. I read it this morning first thing and thought, well, hang on, when did the Berlin Wall go up? And I'm embarrassed to admit I had to check. I'd have said late 50s. It was actually 1961. I don't know whether that would constitute a bigger political crisis than Angela Merkel's attempts to build a coalition. Arguably 1989 when it came down again. Could be. Didn't they also lose a chancellor due to an espionage or a corruption scandal? I may have got that wrong. But the reason I love Twitter is because of the exchange that ensued. So the BBC presenter tweeted, Germany tonight in its biggest political crisis since late 1940s, bigger even than UK's current ongoing political crisis. Then a chap called John Worth replied saying, you have not got a clue. One of four parties walked out of coalition talks. It might take a while to find a solution. And he employed asterisks, I'm happy to say, to add big effing deal. And then the BBC presenter said, I guess you're not watching German media, to which John Worth replied, I live in Germany, I am a member of a German political party and I'm a delegate to its party congress. I follow German politics for my job and just maybe I might know a thing or two about it. And that's why I love Twitter, because I'm sure that it's not, the complete slam dunk that it seems to be, but Twitter sometimes does lend itself to these moments of what I believe the kids called absolutely owning somebody. And if a mic drop indeed, and if you look at John Worth's Twitter biography, you really shouldn't have been questioning his qualifications to comment on matters German. EU citizen with a UK passport, member of Die Grünen in Kreuzberg, campaigner, consultant, blogger, writes about EU, DE, UK and tech, train traveller, city cyclist. And he's also a visiting lecturer at the College of Europe and the University of Maastricht, the former, of course, in Bruges. And he joins me on the line now. Hello.
Good morning.
It's a remarkably amusing beginning to my day. I sit in the car on the way into work and check up on what's happened on Twitter, and rarely do I chuckle quite as fulsomely as I did today. But that's a conversation for when we meet in person, John. Tell me instead what your understanding is of the current situation unfolding in Germany.
Let's be clear, this is a difficult situation in German politics, but it's relatively simple to solve. If all of the parties want to collaborate with each other, they'll find a way of solving the problems that they face. It's the second smallest of the four potential coalition parties who walked out of the coalition negotiations. Germany has faced much worse. Other European countries have faced more complicated coalition negotiations. Everyone in Germany is taking this calmly, so why the UK reaction is so over the top is beyond me.
Oh, well, it's not really beyond you. It's a desperate clutching at Brexit-flavoured straws, and then the idea that political instability in Germany, perhaps for the first time in recorded history, could be good news for Great Britain.
Yeah, but it's not going to be, essentially, because all of the parties...
This is Brexit, John. It doesn't matter.
It's true. Yeah, but the thing is, in the end, it really annoys me, as a Brit living in Germany, to see the reactions of the British press in this regard. Whatever happens, somehow or other, it will give an opportunity for Brexit. Well, hold on a minute. 5 of the 6 German political parties are completely united on Brexit. They are united behind the European Union's line. There is no way that even if it takes until the spring to make a coalition in Germany, that this is going to help Theresa May or it's going to help the Brexiteers. Because other than the populist right in Germany, all of the political parties from far left through to the Christian Democrats all defend the same line. So the very idea that this is a major crisis or that this could manage to benefit Britain on Brexit is simply not true.
I think you've gone native, John Worth. 80% of British newspapers urged their readers to vote for this, and now they're reduced to desperately hoping, in the style of Mr. Micawber, that there might be something around the corner that constitutes good news. So even if it vaguely lends itself to being falsely portrayed as good news, they're going to be all over it like a rash.
I think that's true, but also bear in mind that it actually impacts me personally in that my own future depends on this, and I only have a British passport and I live in Germany, so I'm implicated in all of this at a very personal level. But you're probably right. But I just wish that people across with the exception of your good self, but some of your fellow LBC presenters, and indeed some of and indeed some of our mainstream media commentators could really do with spending some time in Germany, talking to German politicians, even talking to everyday people on the street, and going, hang on a minute, does this actually really matter to you? Because this is not a topic in German politics at all. Germany is trying to sort out its own coalition. It's looking to the future of the European Union, the relationship between Germany and with Macron in France. Brexit didn't even get a mention in the coalition negotiations.
We do
so this is just wishful thinking.
It is.
Yeah,
exactly. Far be it from me to spring to the defence of whichever colleagues you're alluding to, but I know that Nigel Farage travelled to Germany recently to address the party founded by neo-Nazis. And it is, of course, the rise of the AfD that excites some people with regard to the prospect of another election, which Merkel has herself hinted at.
Right. So bear in mind that the AfD at the moment is stable or also even slightly down in the polls. So the idea that if there were a new election, that would suddenly lead to a boost for the AfD is somewhat off. Merkel herself has alluded to the idea of new elections, but other people in her party and even in the Social Democrat Party, the main opposition party, they're also largely opposed. Because if you look at the opinion polls, everything's very steady. So if you had a new election, the chances are you'd end up with a result very similar to what you had in September. So all the German parties are going to talk a bit longer, try and find a way and a means of solving this, potentially looking at the idea of a minority administration, or maybe again revisiting the issue of a grand coalition between Merkel's Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. So what is definitely going to happen is everyone is calm to a certain extent. They see this as a serious situation, but generally calm in Germany, and will talk a bit further, try and find a way and means of making a coalition. And then only if all of that fails will end up going to the polls again, probably sometime in the spring. Bear in mind as well that many people have also said this is perhaps the end of Angela Merkel, but I also don't think that that's true. She's been underestimated throughout her whole political career. She is quite determined to carry on, and indeed she actually looks decent and strong and reasonable through this coalition-making process. It's the Liberals that look like the fools for having flounced out of the coalition negotiations.
So very much watch this space, but it's interesting that you make that allusion, and indeed wonder whether the British media understands any aspects of these wranglings and negotiations, because of course the refugee issue, the objection from the Greens, who remain a potential coalition partner for Angela Merkel, is that her new line on family reunification is too hard. So the British newspapers report this as Merkel's finally suffering for the refugee invitation that she issued a couple of years ago. But in fact, the tension within coalition is that some of her potential partners don't like the idea that family reunification is going to be suspended for a longer period of time. It's utterly nuts, actually, to read it on this side of the fence.
That's correct. But those issues largely those issues are still very important in German politics. But we will find a way forward in German politics, I have no doubt. Ultimately, it's not as mudslinging as British politics is. It's still relatively collaborative. So ultimately, it may take some time. It might take some complicated talks, but ultimately I still think German politics will solve this.
We shall see. John, I shall add you to my very, very short list of expert contributors, if that's all right with you. I can't believe it. I can't believe it took your acrobatics on Twitter this morning for us to properly register your quality and expertise. Many thanks indeed.
Anyway, thanks for the call. Bye-bye.
Anytime. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will draw a line under the Daily Mail's hissy fit about the decision of a greetings card company not to do any more co-promotions with them. All the people who use the word snowflake as an insult, they just have such a criminally low levels of self-awareness. I, for example, find racism really bad. Oh, you snowflake, would you just get over yourself? A wrapping paper company decides not to spend any more money with the Daily Mail. Oh my God, they are succumbing to bullying. This is an affront to everything that I hold dear. If you see any of them, give them a little dummy from